What is up? What is up? What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to Year of the Vet. Or if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome to Year of the Vet. Year of the Vet is a platform that I created. I, being Robert Graves, a 10-year Marine Corps veteran, a transition coach, and author of How to Grow a Beard, a military transition guide back into civilian life. Year of the Vet started off as a slogan for my book that I was selling, and it turned into a kind of a motto that this is the Year of the Vet, and next year will be the Year of the Vet. And as long as there are veterans, it is the Year of the Vet, because veterans are what make the world go round. If you look around right now, we've got veterans in all aspects of government, veterans starting up businesses, entrepreneurs, they're out there working the road. Veterans are out there getting things done, and the United States of America survives off of the backs of veterans. And why that's important to me is because there's so many people out there who are having a hard time with transition, whether they've already transitioned and they're having a hard time, or they're about to transition and they have questions that need answers. That's why Year of the Vet is so important to me, and I think it should be as important to you. Why I created Year of the Vet is because transition is hard. Transition is there's no magical equation to say that, yes, transition is A plus B and then you'll have a good transition. That's not how it happens. Everybody has to struggle, but the problem about struggling is that we don't pass that information down. That's what Year of the Vet is for. For people who have gone out there, transitioned, learned the lessons the hard way, and then come back onto this platform to pass those lessons to you. So what took me 6 years and what took somebody else 10 years and what took somebody else 2 years doesn't have to transfer over to your life to do the same thing. Basically, Year of the Vet is here to pass on the life lessons of transition to those that are following in our footsteps. We paved the way, you don't have to. So with that being said, this is a part 2 of a two-parter. Last week we had on Travis Collier, a Coast Guard active duty officer, who had written Command Your Transition, Declare Your Intent, Craft Your Mission, Make It on the Outside. Travis is also a keynote speaker, a transition coach himself, a transition advisor, and as well as all of that, he's an organizational performance consultant. He brings to the table a different perspective of transition, and that's why I wanted him on to Year the Vet to pass on to you, because the more knowledge out there that you can have, the easier your transition will be. So I hope that if you haven't heard part 1 yet, you'll stop it right here, tap into part 1, and then transfer over. But if you haven't heard part 1 yet, part 2 has just as much new knowledge, so it's not, there's no the flow will not be interrupted. So just enjoy this one, tap back into part 1, see if you missed anything. And then at the end, if you want to get in touch with Travis, visit the podcast website and look into the details on how you can get a hold of Travis. All his social media will be there. And I hope you enjoy part 2 of Travis Collier's Year of the Vet. And if you're looking to make a career transition, let's say, for instance, you wanted to change from ports to, I don't know, government. You want to be a politician, right, for Brunswick. You want to be the mayor of Brunswick. How do you, okay, let's not say Brunswick because you're around there. Let's say Cincinnati. Okay, you want to move to Cincinnati, you want to get into politics. How do you recommend that somebody who's starting new, who has the mindset of starting fresh, that they get to start networking outside of LinkedIn, right? Because LinkedIn is a very important tool. It can do what you want to do if you use it right. However, not everybody's savvy on LinkedIn, and that's another conversation. So how would you recommend other ways? Are there other ways that you recommend?
Absolutely. Podcasting is a way, obviously. There's always other ways. Gotcha. You have to figure out what would be the news cycle of the people you want to connect with and get into the news cycle.
Gotcha.
So for some, it's LinkedIn. Absolutely, it is LinkedIn. If you want to get into the news cycle of hiring managers and recruiters, you can use LinkedIn. So for me, if I want to get into the offshore oil and gas industry after I retire from the military, I'm going to probably move to Houston. I'm going to try to connect with coasties who've also done commercial vessel safety, marine inspection, oil pollution response, and get my name out there that way, wherever they are. That means going to Clean Gulf Conference. That means going to the International Workboat Show. That means getting into that news cycle, getting into that content cycle, really more so than news cycle, of those people who I think will help me get to the next step. So if I want to be mayor of Cincinnati, it's not easy, but I've got to think about, well, one, what party do I want to? Am I going to be Democrat, Republican, or Independent? Two, where are those influencers for that state are, and how do they get their news? How do they get and create their content? Three, can I get stationed in Ohio to start working in Cincinnati to get my name out there and getting on the radar? Mm-hmm. Because, like you're saying, the transition decision, the choice to transition is long before the Twilight Tour. And we should be using our Twilight Tours to help us answer this question of how can I connect with people, not just by using LinkedIn. You know, military members have the hardest problem, and I don't understand why, of making network connections while they're on deployment. Yeah. It's a difficult problem. If you're forward deployed, not even Afghanistan or Iraq, if you're in Germany, Okinawa, if you're in OCONUS, it is difficult to get in front of hiring managers, even if you have a year left and you're ready to get out of the military. And I don't know why, but what it tells me is that proximity is a factor, and whatever you can do to gain proximity will determine what you can do. And it's the same for government. You know, if you want to be a GS, odds are you're going to want a DC assignment for your last tour or your current tour, and you're going to want to try to transition out and do a Friday, Monday, and grow a beard in your same job Monday morning. Yeah. Like, that's the norm, right?
Yeah.
It is. So I would say, how do you get into the content cycle of the people you need in your corner and do whatever it takes to get into that content cycle? And this is a lot of my first book, too. This is the book I wrote when I was on deployment to Saudi Arabia. It's the idea of, I said, leverage. You figure out what activates. You figure out what excites you about what you want to do after the uniform, assuming that's your choice. And then you figure out how you can leverage that opportunity. So if it is to go into politics and you want to be mayor, well, maybe you work for the governor first, then you back down to be mayor. Maybe it's you go nonprofit activist route and work into being mayor. Maybe if you work on a senator campaign or you work at a senator's office in D.C. on a staff as a staffer. There's other ways to get to mayor besides being mayor that you can work on where you are to get there.
And I think the big takeaway is that you have to be a doer, and you have to be aggressive in what it is that you're actively pursuing, right? So, you know, I was in Okinawa, and as a wrench turner, we had, you know, General Dynamics there. You know, there are companies, big companies on the bases that support us. Mm-hmm. Are you still there? Sorry. So yeah, there's big companies there that support us, and my mom and my dad used to say it all the time, a closed mouth never gets fed. You know, if you never open your mouth and say, hey, how do I get a job with you guys, then you'll never know. And then you'll get out and you'll hear that your buddy got a job with General Dynamics, and you're like, hey, why didn't I get that job? Well, you never asked. You know, you never went to go pursue, you never went to go network. And I say it all the time, there's no work like network, because you'll never know. You never know the opportunity that you could have had if you never ask. So, yeah, you know, I know being mayor is kind of out there, but the process of putting yourself in the position where you're able to be in that environment, right? Whether it's you want to be an engineer, whether it's you want to be a chef, right? You have to start in the kitchen somewhere. Like you have to be a go-getter. You have to go out with the intention to do the work and start from the ground up. Sometimes if you're starting fresh, you're going to have to start from the ground up. If you're leaving with the tools of the trade, then you're still going to have to prove yourself in some manner. So yeah, thank you for that, obviously, because people do get hooked on, well, you know, LinkedIn's not working. And we're in this day and age where individuals frown upon you walking a resume in, or I don't know if they frown upon it, but for instance, like my wife and I will have a conversation. I'll say, just take your resume in, and she'll say, they only take them online. And I'm like, or you can be the one person to hand it in. They have a face with the name, and then you separate yourself from the 1,300 other people who applied online. You know, like there's magic to being personable. You know what I mean? So, networking is absolutely one of the biggest things that I push and push and push and push. And one big thing, even while you're in, you don't even have to be a few years out. You can make business cards for yourself, advertising yourself, you know, journeyman in training, something. You don't have to have a business to have a business card. So there's a little tidbit with that. But with intention, I want to get back to intention because I know I'm harping on that a lot, but how do you hone your intention? I'm in my sports psychology master's program right now, and I got certified in hypnotherapy last year, and I have my bachelor's in psych. So my mind is about the mind, right? So when I hear intention, and I'm assuming you've read Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, and probably, I don't know, some others on the process of law of attraction, or maybe The Secret or something. When people hear intention, they think of something like that. You sit down and you write your intention. I will land a job with BSNF for $100,000 within the next 3 months by using XYZ. And they write out their proclamation and they read it 3 times. How do you set intention in the Travis way?
I try to make goals that I feel slightly uncomfortable with, but mostly comfortable with, and that's hard. Okay. It's hard because now I'm trying to set goals that aren't bound by the uniform and are more focused on the future than the past. So, here's an example. It's what do you think you're worth? And I think either you wrote about this, or maybe I was reading about it on LinkedIn this morning. But if you don't feel like you're worth $100,000, eventually it'll come out in how you approach the jobs you look for. If you don't feel like you're a powerful, desired partner in your most closest relationships, you'll put those people at a distance to you. So to me, intention comes from, what are the goals? And it really is even the goals. What's the experience of your life that you feel excited and a little bit anxious by? Not so anxious that you will just don't see if you can ever be there. But, intention is about, what do you identify with that you can be comfortable being identified with? And we've all grown comfortable being identified by being in the military. Hence, that's why we stayed in for so long. Eventually, though, that identity shifts, whether it's family, whether it's a shitty set of orders, whether it's not promoting or advancing, whether it's seeing the opportunities on the outside. There's going to be a reason why your intention to stay in turns towards an intention to get out. And that's not a bad thing. We kind of demonize it in a lot of ways, but there's no reason to demonize it, because for each person, it's their own unique individual choice. So to me, intention comes from, it's vision and mission. It's vision and mission, but it's also about identity. And it's also about, what do you feel 80% comfortable identifying yourself as? And you've got to take time to, this is why I think the transition is important, why it takes longer than most realize, is that who you intend to be on the outside may not be there, because the same maybe problems or the same negative experience you had in the uniform might follow you after the uniform, because your intention wasn't as clear.
Yeah.
I've got my 10-year vision just like anybody else. But the reason why it will or will not work isn't because I don't have the vision. It's because how soon can I identify with that vision? And this is something I'm fighting with personally. that identity's got to be instant. It's not, well, tomorrow, well, a week from now, well, a year from now. No, that identity is right now. And the Marine Corps is a great example. Every Marine who's ever wanted to be in the infantry knew at 15 they wanted to be in the infantry. Mm-hmm. There's no recruiting commercial I can give you that is as powerful as someone who intends to go infantry. It doesn't exist. Every sailor who's truly wanted to be a sailor has always known they were going to be a sailor. There's no Navy commercial or Coast Guard commercial I can give you that says, oh, yeah, that's it. That's the reason. That's what I want to do in my life. Like, resonance, and again, it's internal versus external. Like, if you have your own drive to do it, you do it. And I'm not sure if I'm fully answering your question. So how do I know? Me personally, I know because my goals feel exciting and scary to me at the same time. We talked about the left limit, right limit of anxiety and curiosity. My goals have me both anxious and curious, but more curious than they are anxious, and that's why I'm going towards it.
So with a soon-to-be veteran, how would you ask them to work on their intention? Would you ask them to list it, write down their top 10? How would you coach somebody through this process?
I would figure out why they chose to serve.
Gotcha.
Because why they chose the uniform is going to be the same or close to the same reason why they chose to live life after the uniform.
Gotcha.
And that's what we have to figure out. I mean, that is the argument why people are clinging to rating. It's not the rating that has any power. It's the person that wears the rating that has the power. And I know that sounds basic, but continuing to serve is a choice we continue to make. Mm-hmm. Getting out is a choice that we have to continue to be comfortable with up to the point where we EAS and we can't get back in. So for me, the core of my coaching, my focus would be to figure out why they chose to serve and what about service do they not feel is being fulfilled right now.
Gotcha. So I wanted to explore, you wrote about stances. Can we explore what stances are?
I believe working hard is a perspective of how hard the work needs to be done. So there's one of my coaches, her mentor, a former Navy nuke guy named Kevin Nations. He did 8 years nuclear underwater or subsurface and got out. He talks about this thing called chillionaire. And it's the idea that how much does your work have to feel like work for you to get to 6 or 7 figures? Mm-hmm. How many people are out there? And this goes back to your LinkedIn networking thing. How many people are doing the hard marketing to get the business they want versus doing the referrals method to get the business they want? And it's what I learned in real estate. We talked about in real estate, you have your warm leads, your cold leads, and referrals. But ultimately, what if your marketing budget was zero, your referral budget was 100% or 150%, and you were still getting all the business you want? Would you be happy with that? And I think a lot of people would be, because it's your friends who give you business, not necessarily you having to hunt or peck for business. So this idea about stances, there's a lot of different ways to approach either transition or making the choice to transition. There's a very passive way of doing it. We know the assignments that get us to retirement. We know on law of averages what gets us 20 years. And we can follow that. And that can be very passive because as an E4, you need this assignment. E5, you need this assignment. E6 is about a tour and a half. These are the assignments that you need. When you make gunny, this is the assignment that you need. Somewhere in there, you got to be a drill instructor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, we know that. You can do that, have a great 20 years, and work on something else on the side. Or you can be very aggressive, Gary Vaynerchuk style about, all right, I want to be E9 in 25 years. What commands do I need to work for or work in that give me the record that gets me to E9? And it's the same thing as an officer in the Coast Guard. I know I'll never make flag officer. I know I'll never make 06. The people who know they're going to make 06 have already taken the time to aggressively take on the assignment and have the record that gets them competitive for 06. Versus there can be a passive way to 06 in that you just go afloat for 12 years. That's a very passive way to make 06.
Yeah.
Because if you've gone afloat for 12 years, then you know you've had at least 2 commands, not 3 commands. And we know command is an early designator for senior officer, flag officer rank. So there is an aggressive way that you could go about lining up, 2 tours ahead, this plan, that plan, this mentor 5 years ahead of you to get to 06. And there's a very passive way of, I know I'm going to be afloat for 12 years. Let me go ahead and just get started with being afloat. I'll take whatever comes to me. Like, that to me is what stance is. So in the military, because I believe transition should be an external honest dialogue, the stance of transition can be very passive of, hey, I know I'm doing 20 years. I kind of have an idea what skills I want. So let me work on those skills now at work and on the side. Let me do a deployment. Let me do 2 deployments. I know they're coming. And let me build the resume iteratively across the board to get me that job I want. Versus it can be very aggressive of how, I'm going to do 20 years, but I want to be an E8 at 20 years versus being an E57 at 20 years. So let me put more things in the play. Let me put more things in my plate.
Yeah.
And here's the thing about stance is that stance requires energy and stance has a price. So it could be a family thing. You see a lot of people get married early, have children early because they want to be older when their children are grown. And you see people wait. It's a health thing. You can see people who want to be bodybuilders and people who just want to be healthy and fit. So for me, passive and aggressive in terms of stance is about how do you lean into that work, that side hustle, that practice that you want to do that's going to help you figure out how to fulfill your definition of service.
Yeah.
And then in the book, I talked about parts of stance. To me, stance also leans into intention. You could have a very passive stance, but it doesn't mean passive like you're a blowover or a holdover, but passive as in the amount of decisions you feel you have to make. So that same 06 who wants to be an 06, the rule is still the same. You have to go afloat. You have to go afloat probably 10 to 12 years. You got to do it. If that's the lowest risk chance to make 06, you have to go afloat for 12 years in the Coast Guard, period. Now, you could be aggressive about it. You could be, I only want these commands, or I want only white hulls. I don't want black hulls or red hulls, or I want to do some law enforcement. Or you can be passive about it and say, hey, guess what? I'm going to have 5 shifts in my career. I will take any shift the service gives me.
Yeah.
Let's roll. So that's one way of looking at it. So stance is not something we really talk a lot about because we think, you got to be hard charger. But then it becomes the whole ladder against the wall thing. If it's you and somebody else, you're both going to get the ladder, but is the ladder against the right wall? And are you climbing that ladder at a pace that you can sustain and that you're comfortable with, that you're happy with? The hard chargers who want to be flag officers, general officers, are happy with the pace they're at to be flag officers, general officers. Don't compare yourself against them. Just don't.
Gotcha.
Because that's not where your aggression lies if you don't want to be one of them.
Yeah.
So, it's something I've been mulling over because I want to make sure passive is not being a pushover and that passive is not being non-active. It's just, for me, I think when you take a passive stance, your decision threshold is much higher. Whereas if you take an aggressive stance, and both stances work, I think your decision threshold is a little lower. And I think the level of decision making you take on an aggressive stance is probably more detailed. There's nothing wrong with either one. They both work.
Yeah.
But it's the question of what how do you feel?
I guess it really also correlates well with if you're not, how do I word this? Because I want to talk about the dip, right? In the dip, I asked you what it was offline, but I want to kind of correlate this because if you have this stance, right, where it's, you're kind of saying, I don't want to say stay in your lane, but really understand your lane, right, is more, okay. And so with people who are more passive and they're not, and again, I respect the process of not using passive as a negative term, it can affect, right? We can say that being a little standoffish, I don't even know if that's the word, being a little passive or passive aggressive, at least, in knowing your stance and not seeing the process that you have intended, to kind of sum up more of the book. Once you're doing all this work and you're not reaping what you seem to have sowed, right?
Mm-hmm.
You get into this funk, and you wrote about it, the dip. Can you talk about the dip? I mean, does that correlate well? Did I tie that in well? How you intended the process of, the ups and downs? Maybe not. I mean, you can explain it. Believe me. Like I said, utilize this time to correct me or, set it all straight. But, because you explain the dip as kind of like a low before the high, right?
Yes. For me, the dip. So let me give an example, and I'm going to use Donald Trump as an example. So I haven't talked about him at all yet, and it's going to be a great example. Here it comes. I learned from an 06 who was on the fast track, who recently retired by his own choice, that in D.C., in Washington, there are these two islands of administration, these two islands of performance. There is the island of campaigning and the island of governance. And, he foretold this 4 years ago, and it makes so much sense now. When you're on the island of campaigning, you can say anything you want.
Okay.
And if you look at, you can say anything you want. You can say it all, because you are not in the throne. You do not have the seat of power. You're campaigning. Your job is to win votes. And that relates to Scott Adams and his analysis of Donald Trump. Scott Adams, the cartoonist of Dilbert, predicted in September of 2015, not 2 months ago, a year and 2 months ago, that Trump would win, because Trump was a master persuader, because Trump mastered the art of the campaign. Now, do I agree with most of what he says? Absolutely not. Do I agree with the wall? I do not agree with the wall. But the way he was able to persuade and the way he was able to engage a population to get him 300 electoral votes shows that he's effective at the art of the campaign. But campaigning is not governance.
Yeah.
So Trump says he'll repeal Obamacare, but once you go into governance, can you really appeal Obamacare? It's already been to the Supreme Court once and upheld. Can you really do it? And I would say probably not. I would say 2/3 of Trump's promises cannot come to fruition, because he is now governing the country, and there are a whole lot of other priorities. He doesn't control Congress. He doesn't control the judiciary. He is able to put the votes into the Supreme Court, but he does not control the Supreme Court. The world changes. And the people he was never able to appease in governance will not be with him for the next campaign. It's the same thing with the military on campaign and in garrison. The military at expedition is a much different military, whether it's something as minuscule as regulatory standards for uniform standards, or whether it's something as broad as in the shift from the great power battle of World War II to the counterinsurgency of today. So you take that military in campaign and you put that military in campaign back into garrison. Well, then the questions come out. Do you need a 500,000 member standing military force? You're not on campaign anymore. You're in garrison. Maybe you need a smaller force. And the America has always fought with this idea of, in garrison, how many soldiers and ships do we need? Right now, the Navy's talking about having a 355 ship Navy. We were saying 600 ships 30 years ago. What's changed? Fall of Russia. The change in the global environment. So maybe 600 ships in the era of Reagan would be excessive in the era of Trump. So the dip to me is that shift between one way of doing business and another way of doing business. The dip to me is who we are in the uniform and who we are after the uniform. Because this world inside the uniform, it's its own different thing. And in the volunteer force that we have, we will continue to have fewer and fewer people choosing to serve just per capita by the nature of the growth of the populace, which means that disconnect between military and civilian is only going to grow over time. So we know this. We understand this brotherhood, this sisterhood, this comrade, this community of arms. We get this. We know this. Whether it's 5 years, 10, or more, we are comfortable with this. The dip becomes when that Monday after you realize, or EAS, like you said, no reveille. Or like your argument, your story was about lunch. Hey, no one tells me when to go lunch anymore. Like something that small, it's a chuckler, but something that small is indicative of the diversity and the dissonance between a military culture and civilian culture. And it's even more dissonant when you think about, wait a minute, I can start my own business. I could be a franchise. I could run a search fund. I could be a venture capital guy. I could be an employee. Like, we're not even talking about skills. We're talking about ways to promote your skills. You could be a freelancer. You could be a contractor. You could be a GS. Like, all that's not even on the table when you're in the military. In the military, you have E4, E5, E6, E7, E8, Ws, and Os. Like, that's it. Whereas on the outside, or I hate saying outside, but after the uniform, whoa, you could be a contractor for a few years with General Dynamics. You could be a GS for NSA for a couple of years. You could work for Agilent. You could work for Stratfor. You could work in Council of Foreign Relations. Like, there's just, the dip comes to us when we see the magnanimity of choices that we had that we've never had to have before ever in our working lives.
Yeah.
That's what the dip is. The dip is, all right, I can do anything. And not anything in some like pejorative sense, but literally I can fulfill my skill set in a dozen different ways. All of them I've never seen in uniform.
Man, it's funny because there's so much to transitioning, right? There's so much to look at externally as well as internally, because you have to see what's going. I mean, you have to keep an eye on what's going on in the government, right?
Mm-hmm.
And definitely kind of mold, I guess, your outside personality or your outside lifestyle to what's going to make you most happy and most successful at the same time. And if your mindset is on getting rich, you have to understand what's going on in the country. And if your mindset's on
mm-hmm.
healing the world, you have to understand what's going on in the country. And so there's a lot of all of that. I don't write about a lot of that. So the fact that you're talking about that and coming at it from a different approach is why I'm not shying away from having another transition coach on the podcast with me, because there's so many things that go. I mean, if you were to write one big transition book, it would be a really big book and it'd be kind of confusing,
mm-hmm.
Because there's so many elements to it. And so I appreciate that you're here talking about that. And I never had actually sat there and thought about that process. But there's like two more things I kind of want to touch on. I know I've had you for a long time, but one thing is treating transition as a part-time job. I want to talk
mm-hmm.
about that. Like, you're in right now and you know better than anybody on how much time you should and shouldn't allot to transitioning, and how soon you should be thinking about it. Because I couldn't wait to get out. I didn't treat the TAPS and TAMP time as well as I should have, and I know a lot of people aren't. But being that you develop this process from within, you have a better insight on how long or how soon is too soon, I guess would be a better way of saying that, and how in the present is not soon enough. And then also, sorry to add to that, like, who else should you be kind of tapping into while you're in, right? For both enlisted and officer.
I don't think it's ever too soon to consider transition at all.
On the footprints.
I don't. I honestly don't think it's too soon. What's that?
I said on the footprints.
Yeah, absolutely. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah on the footprint. I mean, think about it. So, let's look at the special war. Let's look at the special forces community. You know, the people who ring the bell are the people who lose focus on the goal. And the immediate goal is to get your pen, is to get your tab. You know, we know when we sign up, we're signing up for 4 to 6 years. We know that's up front. That's the beginning. But I'm not saying while you're on deployment, think about getting out. But what I say is, when you're in garrison, when you're in home port, that's the time to think about, well, what from this experience can I take with me? In every year you serve, you should have one story that would define who you want to be after you get out. So in 20 years, I should have 20 stories, but I shouldn't be having. I shouldn't have to go back 20 years to find those first 3 stories. I should have one story a year.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying devote a day a month, but I do think it's iterative. I think if you genuinely craft your network now, because, you know, here's the thing. In the military, if you want to make 06, you start your first assignment, period.
Okay.
I'll use my personal example. My 05, my commanding officer made 06 in my first assignment, and I didn't realize it, but my commanding officer was connected to one of our commandants because they had known each other since he was a cadet at the academy. So, yeah, you start transition the same way you would start if you want to strive for being a flag officer, general officer. You start early. You start as soon as possible. People decide they want to go special warfare. They decide as soon as possible. And they align their career to give them the best opportunity to not have to ring the bell and to complete whatever basic special warfare training there is that you could choose from. Like, you do that. You know, if you want to be an 06 colonel in the Army, you're going to Ranger School as soon as possible.
Yeah.
You're going to get probably a mountain tab or an SF tab on top of that. If you want to be an 06 in the Marine Corps, you must command as early and as frequently as possible. So, yeah, I think transition starts from the beginning. I think whenever you decide the level of aspiration you want in the military is the same moment you decide the level of aspiration you want outside of the military. And in the book, there's a quote by Sebastian Marshall that says, "A captain, not a general, or a king." And Marshall's point is this: you choose one of the 3. If you want to be a king, kings are anointed. They're necessarily chosen. But if you want to be a captain, that's really that level of aspiration is kind of self-serving. It's about being the best of yourself and how you're commanded to be the best of yourself. If you want to be a general, if you want to be that level of importance and significance or effectiveness, then it's about how you serve others, how you make others become captains. And if you want to become a king, you're born with it. Sorry. If you want to be a star, you're born with it. And I'm serious. Like, the Bob Lefset has another way of looking at it. He says, in the music industry, you have 4 levels. You have hobbyists, journeymen, professionals, and stars. So a hobbyist is a guy that's in the garage. A journeyman is someone who's local, who does local shows. A professional is the guy, the guitarist, the bassist you can call up to back Metallica and Trent Reznor that no one in the audience knows, but the artists know who he or she is.
Yeah. And
then Taylor Swift's a star. Kanye West is a star. You can't choose to be a star. You're anointed to be a star. You're anointed to be a king. Look at it this way. Not every general could be president.
Mm-hmm.
Not every general could be president. Grant won the Civil War. He became a 2-term president. Eisenhower, architect of World War II, he became president. But look who else was around him.
Yeah.
Sherman never became president. You know, MacArthur never became president. If I think about Vietnam, Krulak the Elder, gave up his chance for a 4th star to tell President Johnson he was wrong.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, stars and kings are anointed. So it's about level of aspiration. I truly believe before it's about transition, it's about the choice to serve and how you choose to best serve. And that, once you've made that decision, you have made the decision whether or not you want to be a captain in uniform or a captain out of uniform. You've made that decision of whether or not you want to be a general with the stars over your shoulders or whether you want to be a general in an industry. They are on both sides of the same coin that is choice.
Well, you write about 3 people that you're going to need to help you in life. And so if you were to take the captain, the general, and the king, right? Those are the 3?
Yep, absolutely.
If you were to take those 3, can you translate those into advisors, mentors, and coaches? Are one of those the king, or does that not transfer at all?
It doesn't transfer at all, okay. Because I'll use an example.
Well, you could elaborate on those 3 people as well.
Okay. It doesn't equally translate because I believe the level of what you need to be the level of what you need to be. So, for example, you don't see a lot of 04s hanging around flag officers, but what you do see are the flag A positions that are filled by 04s who have that access. So guess what? Now you've got direct line to an advisor who can help you get to that level. Like, that's what happens.
Gotcha. That's
what happens in the military. You know, like, we see it. We know who those people are, and we're proud for them. But culturally, those are selection mechanisms and tools to breed, I hate to say breed, but to grow that next generation of people at the same level. So it's not necessarily equal or even, but it's also about, time availability.
Yeah.
If a king is a Richard Branson, if a king is a Tim Cook, well, how many captains that are advisors, mentors, or coaches are going to have access to Tim Cook? Not a lot.
Yeah.
They're going to be at the same level. So there are 3 groups of people I think you need, and I think you've got to, choose wisely. You need mentors. So you need someone who's 2 tours ahead of you in the military or 5 years ahead of you as a civilian to help you determine the skills, the tours, the assignments, the practices, the challenges you need to have to get to their level. Then you need advisors. And advisors are the people who help you figure out, is all this shit worth it? Is this the experience you want? Mm-hmm. The advisors are kind of like the mirror on the wall. They help you determine, when you put your life together, is it the life you want to have?
Yeah.
And then I consider as an advisor, and then coaches, instead of giving you outside advice, they help you find the internal advice that you're going to follow. They're going to help you find your own internal wisdom. So there's 3 ways to look at transition then from each of these roles. If I'm a mentor, I'm the person who's 5 years ahead of you, helping you get to where I am or be better than who I was. If I'm an advisor, I'm more oblique to where you are to help you figure out holistically, are you enjoying what you're doing? Are you growing in what you're doing? Or are you going to continue to do what you're doing? If I'm a coach, I'm at 90 degrees. I am completely perpendicular to where you are. And I'm saying, look in the mirror. Is that still the you want to be when you grow up? And it's interesting how, like you said, we're all transition coaches. We're all in the transition assistance industry. But there's all these different ways to approach transition because for the military members we serve, there's a whole lot of different ways we can look at it. It goes back to, again, the dip.
Yeah.
The dip isn't jobs necessarily. It's about how we approach jobs. We know how to sell ourselves in uniform. We know how to look razor sharp. We know how to have the perfect white gloves personnel room inspection. Like, we know how to market ourselves as military members.
Yeah.
But that marketing becomes a different skill as a civilian. So a mentor would help you specifically market yourself in the way you want to go. An advisor would help you accept the fact that you have to market yourself. And a coach would just say, hey, guess what? Is this what you really want to serve by? And then those three things help triangulate who you are and who you want to be.
Yeah.
So, no, do I think they correlate with Captain, General, and King? No. Also, as a writer, I love to alliterate in threes, so I have to watch myself sometimes because it does sometimes lead to false correlation. I know I'm bad at it. But to me, it's about level of aspiration. What level do you want to be? Whether it's Captain, General, or King, or whether it's a hobbyist, journeyman, professional, and a star. And going to that level, that 4-level split, like Bob Lefsetz notes, generals are our stars, literally. Mm-hmm. They are. Mad as a sec death, everyone's happy about it.
Yeah.
They are literally and figuratively the stars of the military. And that's who Trump went with. He went with the stars of the military. Whether or not you agree with politics or stance, he went with the stars, not the professionals. You're not seeing a president pick 06s to be secretaries. You might see them be deputy assistant or undersecretary, but you're not seeing them pick them. You're not seeing them being picked to be at that star level, which makes sense. There are people who join the military because they treat it as a hobby. You've worked with them before. They were not long for the uniform. You've worked with people who have picked the military to be journeymen in the military, and there's nothing wrong with that. You could be an 8-year E5. Nothing wrong with that. You could see the people who joined the military who chose to be professionals about it.
Yeah. The
people like me and others who've decided to make 20 the mainstay. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
So that level of aspiration is one way of delineating how far you want to go, where do you aspire to be. But the people who support you is a little different because they're not necessarily at the same level of aspiration. However, they should help you get to your level of aspiration.
So, would you consider Command Your Transition a guaranteed recipe for success if somebody follows it to a T?
Yes. However, if someone follows the entire book, they would blow my mind because it's more of a cookbook. I mean, seriously. I mean, Tim Ferriss is one of my favorite authors. So I've got Tools for Titans somewhere in my bag. I'm going to read over holiday routine. I kind of wrote this book the way Tim writes all of his books, in that it's a cookbook. So when I talk about strategies for transitioning, whether it's last in, first out, canvas strategy, or study strategy, I don't expect one veteran to use all three of those strategies. Now, that said, it's not just a transition book, it's a choice book. So if I look at those three strategies for how you want to continue your career, last in, first out, what's the last thing I want to do? This is the first thing I join when I get out or when I transfer. Canvas strategy. What are the things I can do or create that help bring other people together? And a great example I remember for that is companycommander.com. Back during OIF, 2004, 2005, 2006, before the counterinsurgency manual was written, company commanders were coming back from combat and were using a offline civilian forum to relay lessons learned and OPSEC and situational awareness and data about the environment to other company commanders going into combat. Like, that is a canvas and a study strategy, which is what we think ratings are, but it's really what the skills are. What do I want to learn about? What do I want to be an expert in 10 years? Or maybe 5 years?
Yeah, gotcha.
What do I want to be good at in 5 years? So I don't expect a veteran to use all three of those strategies to make E8 or to get out because there's just no time to use all three of those strategies. But I expect them to use a strategy that works best for them. So I broke up the book in this way of how being the year before, the moment you make a choice transition, the book comes into play. You get a year after that to the point to the day that your EAS to relay or retire. And then the third part of the book is really about that year after, the whole looking back. Did this all make sense? Are you living the experience that you want? Have you gotten down another hole or a hole that you didn't expect to be in, that kind of thing? So you may not need that. I mean, ideally, an ounce of prevention beats a pound of cure. If you think about the strategy, if you think about the stance up front, and honestly, the one lesson I want veterans to take, I think every veteran should take, is the fact that every year equals a month, or every $10,000 equals a month. That would do huge dividends for being the ounce of prevention against the pound of cure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I believe a veteran, if anyone takes this, I think they can go as far as being a flag officer as well as commanding the transition outside. However, I think it's about being honest about what parts they need and using each part they use to the very end.
It's you haven't gone through the process yet, but I can vouch that. So 10 years in, right? So that would be 10 months to unwind. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah. So
that'd be right.
I can actually vouch that it will take you longer to unwind, but I can also vouch that there's a lot of unwinding. Like there's even unwinding once you finally get your job, and then you have to figure out your role, and then your role compared to this person's role, and then you're unwinding that whole, in the military, kind of like mentioning, back in the day, like, believe me, there's a lot of, when I was in the Coast Guard or when I was in the Marine Corps, it's like, if you've ever met anybody from Okinawa, you're like, shut up with when I was in Okinawa. Back in Okinawa, like, that's all you say. But when you get the civilian job, you do that, and it takes probably 10 months to unwind there. So I'd say, like, unwinding, finding yourself as a veteran, and then unwinding and finding yourself as an employer. So there's some food for thought. But what would you tell veterans who have already transitioned and they're finding themselves struggling today?
The struggle is still, to me, whether it's a year from now or 6 years from now, it's still a struggle of why. I think it's still a struggle of why did you make a choice that's causing you struggle? And that's the hard part to answer is we feel like I've always made the right choice. I'll just keep making choices instead of murder boarding or after actioning. Well, why is a certain choice leading to you feeling frustrated with a certain set of circumstances? And it's really divorcing your choice from how you feel about the choice that help you figure out what you could choose differently.
Well, also, you mentioned something about the Richardson Society.
Yes.
And what is Go ahead.
So this is not. I read this on T Nation, so testosteronenation.com. This was years ago, and the Richardson Society was named after a group of Army, I think, captains were on mid-deployment leave or post-deployment leave, and they named the society after one of their peers who died in combat, or one of their friends as part of this group of officers. And essentially, what they do is they would travel to other countries and have these luxurious, extravagant experiences living and working and being in another country. So they would take 2 weeks off, travel to Australia, go to Australian wine country. They would have these catered dinner cigar parties, and they would just take care of themselves. And my idea of the Richardson Society is that it's kind of what you see Ryan Mickler doing right now, Order of Man, in the Iron Council.
Yeah.
You have a group of people who take time to be both a mastermind group about sharing not just tools, tricks, and practices about living, but also being an accountability group. If they want to make change, if they want to establish a different identity, then they can work within this group to make that identity possible. So it's called a Richardson Society. It's out there. You call it whatever you want. You can call it your Friday night poker group, whatever you want to call it. In Saudi, at ESCON, there were a couple of poker nights that happened where people just hung out at 3 a.m. and just played poker and shot the shit. And there's nothing wrong with that. But it's a way to decompress like-minded people who may experience different levels of the same either dissonance or frustration or anxiety or curiosity. And then you can report back to each other. You can learn from each other. You can be accountable to each other. And it would help. To me, it helps veterans make the choice.
Yeah.
And it helps military members. I mean, we do it. We do this. We study for service-wise. When we study for qualification. Like, we make these close-knit communities of people that are not in our squad or platoon, but may have the same skills that we have, may have been where we're from, maybe going to where we're going, and we ping them throughout our careers while we're in the military. And you don't see a lot of that on the outside, and it's the exact thing that we need as military members, having grown up in that when we get outside.
Yeah.
So it's huge.
You say that, and I still keep in touch with some of my like mindset brothers, and in fact, some of them were in my wedding, and and I'd been out at that point many years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's 1,000% right. You got to tap into the people who lift you up and not knock you down, right? Those who aid you in achieving goals and reaching a higher mindset, something that, like you said earlier, with intention, that puts you into an uncomfortable position, but not too uncomfortable that it's not attainable, right? Somebody that's going to hold you accountable for your SMART goals. So, well, I had a fantastic conversation with you today, and I don't want to keep you longer than what I've already kept you, and maybe we can do something down the line later on, but I want to thank you for coming and being a part of Year of the Vet. One question I do ask people before they leave, well, a few questions. The one primary is, do you have anybody in mind that you'd like to kind of give a shout out to right now that could have an impact on this show, You're the Vet, for other vets? Is there somebody out there doing big things that you admire and that you know?
So when I published Commander Transition, I've come across a lot of people over the course of the last year, both in the transition space, both considering their transition, and people who've also gotten out. I think my friend Rachel would be a great opportunity for Year the Vet. She was Army, 8 years in intelligence, and got out. And she is kind of in the same arena that we're in, but she really focuses more on helping people uncover their inner restraint, in that when we wear the uniform's a mask. The uniform is something that constrains a lot of people. And when you get out, that constraint is not there anymore. And not having the boundary to punch up against or knock up against can be very challenging. Mm-hmm. So Rachel and I, we met online in May. We met face-to-face back in November. And she's been awesome. She's in Virginia in the D.C. area, also working with veterans. And she's also working with veterans and families, which is something I know I'm not doing. I'm really focused on the member and the members making choices. But she looks at it holistically and helping people realize that the choice to stay in or get out is a choice that is a communal choice, not just an individual choice. Both communal in terms of the family that's around you, as well as the peer group that you leave behind. So I think Rachel would be good to talk to for Year of the Vet as a potential guest.
We're going to reach out to Rachel. She's going to hear this, and you're going to hook me up on LinkedIn.
Absolutely.
I'll hit you up, Rachel. But beyond that, do you have any social media that you'd like to share, or any way that somebody can get back to you, or how can we find your book? All that good information.
So I have 2 books that are out. My first book, Scale, I published while I was on deployment to Saudi Arabia. That is on Amazon. And my second book is Commander Transition, also on Amazon. They're both ebooks right now. I will go to paper with Commander Transition, probably 2019 or 18. I just haven't decided when yet. But I do want to follow that standard process of going to paper after going to an ebook. They're cheap. Combined, they're $6. Buy them, enjoy them. If you can't buy them, I will give them to you, obviously. Absolutely. I want the story to get out.
I tell
more
people
so
all the
to
time,
make money from the proceeds.
I have given more books away than I've sold, and it's because there's the mindset that, yeah, of course you want to make money off of this, but you don't write a transition book to be rich. You write a transition book because you care. So
exactly.
Yeah. Anyway, besides LinkedIn, any social media?
So I'm everywhere, but I really follow LinkedIn because this is where the conversation about making the choice to stay in or get out takes place. It's not Facebook. Mm-hmm. I thought it was Facebook, and I made a lot of money. I lost a lot of money making that mistake.
Yeah.
So I'm on LinkedIn. I am Travis Scott Collier on LinkedIn. I am probably the only Travis Scott Collier on any social media platform.
Okay.
I've got a Twitter. I never use it. I'm on Facebook, but I really don't talk a lot on Facebook about this work. I'm on Snapchat. I love Snapchat, but I don't find a lot of military members on Snapchat. Really, LinkedIn, I think, is the place to find me. I do have a website, but really the website right now is the reposting of all the articles I write for LinkedIn.
Gotcha.
So if you like me on LinkedIn, you find me on LinkedIn, that's the best place to have a conversation.
Okay. So that is a full load today. So Lieutenant Commander Travis Collier, I appreciate you taking your time out on your break and joining me on this conversation on You're the Vet and trying to reach out to those who are looking for something that they can use, something that you can offer. And man, I just, from a year ago when we both started out, we're just moving forward, and I appreciate that, I have buddies on the same path. So definitely tap into you and vice versa, and let's heal some lives and get people out there being successful with their bad selves.
Absolutely, Robert. Thank you again for the opportunity.
No, thanks, man. I had a great time. So, but now we're signing off. This is Robert Graves and Travis Collier on You're the Vet, and I hope that you check back in on the next episode. Take care.